Shalom. Welcome to Light of the Nations. When last we were together studying in Maimonides Hilchot Beit HaBechira, towards the end of chapter 2, we spoke about the Shitin, the foundation of the altar, and the unique system by which some of the blood from the sacrifices, from the offerings, and the wine from the libations trickles down to the channels in the bottom of the altar, and from there, actually, to the Tehom, the very waters of the depths. And towards the end of that lesson, we quoted from the Talmud, actually Tractate Sukkah, and we cited the Agadata, the homiletical teaching regarding King David's actually laying of these foundations and his desire to have the Shitin connect all the way to the waters of the depths. And in retrospect, I'm thinking now that we really could go much deeper on this topic, and that I'd like to take this opportunity then to speak a little bit more about King David, about our relationship with King David, who King David really was and is, perhaps will be, and his unique relationship with the temple. We spoke about these things rather on a kind of a simple level, and just cited several sources regarding the tradition of King David and the laying of the digging of the foundation of the temple. And I'd really like to go a bit deeper, because I felt when we finished that the topic of King David and what he means to us and his relationship with the temple is so compelling and important for us to understand for our time as well. I felt that we really didn't do it justice. So I'd like to go further into that topic, the topic of the depths, if you would, to go deeper into the depths, the waters of the depths, and also to explore perhaps on a mystical level our understanding of King David and what his precious soul, which is really the soul of Mashiach, the soul of the Messiah, what this really represents. And as usual, whenever we go deeply into the Torah, I always like to issue some sort of disclaimer stating that however deep we go and whatever we're able to share, don't think that this is it. You know, I feel that we need to do more justice to such an important topic, but this is still not it, because there is just no limit. Like the water of the depths itself, there's no limit to the depths of Torah wisdom and knowledge. Let's talk a little bit about King David. There is a beautiful verse in the Song of Songs. It's chapter 7 and verse 14 that tells us, the mandrakes give their fragrance, hadudaim, natnu reach. The mandrakes give forth their fragrance. But this word in Hebrew, hadudaim, if we look at it, it really spells out also the Davids. The Davids give forth their fragrance. The Davidics. And there is a teaching from our sages that the time of Mashiach to be revealed, the time when the power of that great soul will be so overwhelming that it will be revealed, will be the time when all of the Davidics, all of us who feel attached to that soul, and all of us who pine for King David, you know, true Jewish leadership, exactly what we're missing now, compassionate and just. When those Davidics, the Dudaim, give forth their fragrance, meaning when they waft out towards the world the great desire for King David, that's when things will happen. So let's talk together about King David. You know that there's a very unique relationship between Adam Harishon, the first man, and King David. Our sages, maybe in the most succinct teaching on this topic, our sages tell us that when God showed Adam every generation, he came to the generation of King David, and God told Adam, I thought I was going to do something over here at this time. I thought I had someone named David, but it's not going to work out. I don't have time. In other words, Hashem took Adam on some sort of incredible spiritual journey, some sort of vision. He stood him on some sort of vista and showed him the panorama of every subsequent generation. In other words, his descendants. That seems quite fitting and fair, because King David, because Adam is the antecessor of all humanity, and thus has a vested interest and a right to know what is the outcome of the saga that I began. So Hashem took Adam and showed him this beautiful panorama of every generation. And then he came to the generation of David HaMelech, King David, and he said, well, I had this idea, but I can see. Let's go on. Anyway, as I was saying, he said, I don't have time for this particular neshama, this soul. And the sages tell us, Adam was very upset. Adam said, isn't there anything that you can do? Come on. You can't have this soul. And Hashem said, it's not going to materialize. And so finally, Adam said, I will give him a gift. I will give him 70 years of my own life. And in fact, you know that Adam originally, according to the plan, was going to live forever. And after the sin of the tree of knowledge, was destined to live for 1,000 years. But we find, in fact, that Genesis records that he lived for 930 years. This is because our sages teach us he gave Adam a gift outright of 70 years. Why was that so important to Adam? Why was it so important to him, this one particular person, that he should live, that he went out of his way to make sure of it, to guarantee it, to be his guarantor? Well, the Holy Arizal teaches us that Adam and David and Mashiach are really all branches of the same soul. They're all Gilgulim, they're all incarnations of the same soul. And look at the word Adam. It's made up of 3 letters, Aleph, Dalid, Mem. And they stand for Adam, David, and Mashiach, the 3 guises of this soul. And one who understands a little bit about the mystical teachings of reincarnation according to the mystics, according to the Kabbalists, would understand that this is actually the example par excellence of the beauty of that concept in terms of the exact justice and compassion of Hashem. Because the underlying principle of the teaching of Gilgul is that Hashem always gives a person another chance to fix what he has broken. And of course, Adam HaRishon broke everything, broke the world, as it were. Who better to fix that mess than Adam HaRishon himself? So the beauty of this idea is that Mashiach, meaning David HaMelech, is actually, literally, as we always say figuratively, but no, we can see literally the rectification of humanity per se, because it's actually the same force that is closing the circle. So this is all on that level. And again, on a deeper mystical level, we can see how it was very difficult to bring this soul into the world. The soul of Mashiach is so high, so holy. It's like a soul that had to come into the world through a back door, through some sort of witness protection plan, because there would be such an accusation and there would be such a tumult and an uproar over that soul that it had to be done in such a way that it would not attract negative attention. And we're taking here vast concepts and kind of condensing them very succinctly, but this is the explanation for why we notice at every stage of the introduction of the vast great soul of David HaMelech into the world, there were things going on that seem to be very out of place, out of sync, and in fact that seem to not make any sense at all. I refer, of course, to the very fact that King David is a descendant of Ruth the Moabite, who herself is a descendant of a very untoward incident, untoward to say the least, with Lot and his daughter. Add to this the most peculiar situation of Yehuda and Tamar, the highly speculative situation of David and Bathsheba. All of these are just a few of the examples of how this holy soul comes into the world in a very circuitous route, to say the least. Now, in our last Beit HaBechira, we spoke about the relationship between King David and the Holy Temple. And again, King David as the force of redemption in the world, as the tool that Hashem would use to allow humanity to bring about redemption. The Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, is going to be very central in that equation, in fact, the arena. So King David was extremely, extremely concerned about the Holy Temple. God duly informed him that it would not be his role to build the temple, that it would be given over to King Solomon, to his son, for all of those reasons that we have learned. However, still, King David did much in his lifetime to prepare for the establishment of the Holy Temple. And we can read about this in the Tanakh. And King David expressed himself very clearly as to how much this meant to him. You know, in the book of Psalms, there's a very telling verse. It's chapter 122, I believe. Verse 1, where King David says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go up into the house of the Lord. Samachti be'omrim li Beit Hashem nelech. I was happy when they said, let's go to Hashem's house. Now, ostensibly, when we read that verse, it seems quite lovely that people said, let's go to Hashem's house, and King David was glad. But our sages actually give us two different meanings to that verse, kind of what was going on behind the scenes. And they're two different extremes, and they're both quite difficult to hear. One of the interpretations of this verse is that King David overheard people saying, when is this old man going to die already so that his son can take over and build the Holy Temple? Because, you see, it was known that King David was not to build the Holy Temple. So he heard people saying, enough already, isn't it time for him to go? That was one level. But another level, our sages tell us, is that King David had people walking by his windows saying, we're going to the Holy Temple, you're going to be building the Holy Temple? Who needs a Holy Temple? Much as we have today. Derision, opposition. People were just making fun and saying, we're going to be building the Holy Temple, really? But to both attitudes, King David only turned and smiled and was glad, because his whole life was dedicated towards making a place for Hashem in this world. And so no matter what people said, he was glad when he heard people saying, Beit Hashem Nelech, let us go up to the house of Hashem. You know, there's a very important tradition in Jewish life that when we recite the book of Psalms, we try very hard to envision the type of situations that King David is referring to, because King David, who had this tremendous collective soul, he foresaw every one of us. You know that according to our sacred tradition, the book of Psalms is very powerful spiritual tool. And in times of distress and in times of joy, we turn to the book of Psalms, and Rabbi Nachman taught that the main aspect of saying Psalms is to literally find yourself in the verses. And notice how many times throughout the book of Psalms King David refers to calling out to Hashem from the narrow places and from the depths and from the straits and from sorrow. This is not only a reflection of his own personal life. He is literally speaking for the entire nation and for the entire world. It is the concentration, the capsulization of all human experience and of all human yearning and pining for Hashem. That's what's really going on there. So it's King David who, in this aspect of this guise, and again, we can't, in this format and this forum now, on one foot, very easily and knowledgeably squeeze into a nice little unit the whole concept of how we feel about the concept of reincarnation and neshamot that come back and do another round to try to make the tikkun, to try to fix things. These are things that are deep as the depths, but we can begin to understand some of the allusions, at least, of our sages in telling us about these magnificent ideas. You know, in our last lesson, we cited from the Babylonian Talmud regarding this idea that when King David was digging out the foundations of the Holy Temple, he came all the way to the water of the depth, and apparently unexpectedly the waters of the depths began to rise up, and I quoted the whole teaching regarding the quieting of those waters through a sacred name of Hashem, and the songs of ascent, which first were songs of descent, and then King David, realizing that the water should be closer to the surface, became songs of ascent, and they rose up again. And that's all that we said about that. Except that I did mention one idea which was important to me, and I'll say that again, and that is that it's emphasized in some of our sacred literature that because King David is really the personification of the tzaddik, the righteous one, it was important to him that the shitin, that this system of trickling down in the altar, that it reach all the way to the center, to the water of the center of the earth. And the reason for that is because King David, through much of his life, in his own life, and as the spirit of Mashiach, it was important to him to be able to go down to the depths, to bring up those lost souls that are stuck all the way down there. As many of us feel sometimes in our own lives that we are plummeted really far below, and the tzaddik seeks to reach down to those lowest levels. There's a verse that says, her feet go down to death. And there's a teaching in Chassidut that this refers also to the Shekhinah, and also an aspect of the tzaddik, the righteous one. A tzaddik is not measured by how high he can ascend to in the upper levels. That's not so hard for a person to have a spiritual experience and to be removed from this world. A tzaddik is measured by how low he can go and then rise up, because he wants to go all the way down to the place where the lost souls are stuck. That is both the role of the tzaddik, ultimately Mashiach, and also, of course, the role of the Beit HaMikdash, and here is where they come together. But when I mentioned that I felt that we didn't do this whole concept justice, one of the things that I have in mind is that there is another citation that I'd like to share with you that goes into a little bit more depth regarding this whole Agartha, this whole homiletical tradition about King David digging the foundations for the Shittin. And this one is from the Jerusalem Talmud. And you should know that this concept of the differences between the versions that are extant in the Babylonian Talmud and those that we find in the Jerusalem Talmud, an entire treatise could be prepared about this historical facts and this concept in scholarship. There are different approaches that the rabbis of the land of Israel had in halacha and as well as tradition to those of their counterparts in Babylon, and much can be learned regarding these different traditions. In the Jerusalem Talmud, there are some details that appear in the rendition of this story that don't appear in the lesson, in the lesson that we shared from the Babylonian tractate. So I'd like to just mention some of this as well, because it casts a new insight on the whole issue. And here, the wording is different. Here the wording is actually that when King David was digging out the foundations of the Holy Temple, he dug down 15,000 amot and still did not find the Tehom. So, one major difference here is that this passage in the Jerusalem Talmud clearly indicates to us that he was looking for the Tehom. This was no accident. He was looking for the Tehom. And in the end it says he found a piece of clay, a piece of potsherd, atzitz is the word, a piece of clay, and he came to pick it up. Now remember that this is a homiletical teaching, and again, how much can we go over the fact that these things can be understood on so many levels. The main thing for us to understand is that it's a vehicle by which our sages of blessed memory are sharing with us profound ideas, not necessarily to be taken literally. We have to understand and have a way of approaching this. So here in this particular rendition, the piece of pottery actually speaks to King David and says, "Don't pick me up." King David says, "Why? Why shouldn't I pick you up?" And the pottery says, "Because I am guarding over the Tehom, the water of the depth. I am here to make sure it doesn't come up." And King David said, "How long have you been here?" Do you think that the answer is from the 6 days of creation? No. The piece says, "I am here from the time that the heavenly voice was heard at Sinai that said, 'I am the Lord your God.' From that time I am here, because the whole earth shook and the Tehom started to sink, and I am here covering it over." Now this, of course, rings true to us and recalls to us the statement of our sages that the earth was like, it was like not totally established. It was kind of like jello. It was not firmed up until the Jewish people accepted the Torah at Sinai. The exact language of our sages is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, actually made a condition with creation itself that it would not be finalized until Sinai. So here at Sinai, according to this homiletical teaching, the world shook, and that's when this piece was inserted. So I use the feminine voice because it's written in the feminine. She warned David, this piece of pottery, and said, "Don't lift me up." But even so, David did not listen, and in fact lifted it. And since he lifted it, then the Tehom began to rise and almost flooded the world, and the rest of the story is the same as we are aware of it, the idea of Achitophel and the concept of the 15 songs of ascent, which caused the water to go down and then to begin to ascend again to its proper place, because, as we mentioned in our last lesson, David realized that the closer the Tehom is to the surface, the better it is for the world. So on a deeper level, we confront this incredible narrative with some obvious questions. Perhaps the first one being, well, again, according to the sages, if the pottery actually warned David and said, "Don't lift me up," why in the world did he, in fact, lift it up? And perhaps the answer is that by saying, "Don't lift me up," the one thing that he would want to do would be, in fact, to lift it up. Meaning, King David, who wrestled his entire life with the Tehom of the world, the Tehom of every person, of the soul of every person, the maelstrom that we find ourselves in as a result of the mistake of Adam, he knew that it was important for that to be close to the surface. He knew that it was important for us to struggle with it. That is Mashiach. Mashiach is the perfection of righteousness, of the tzaddik who knows that we live in this world, but we can conquer this world. And that's when Mashiach comes, when we have done our best to live as people, but according to Hashem's word, and by sanctifying Him. And he realized that that warning, "Don't lift me up," was a test for him, but that it was important for that Tehom to be close to the surface. You know, in some ways, the act of lifting this piece up and everything that ensued from it reminds us of the fact that Adam and Chava were warned of only one thing, not to eat from the tree of knowledge, and yet they did. There's a very beautiful idea, which I think expresses an insight into this whole topic of King David. According to the insight of our sages, Adam had a great comprehensive soul, and it contained the souls of all humanity. So there were two very great tzaddikim. Several generations after the holy Baal Shem Tov, they were brothers. And they were very, very famous, holy, righteous men. Much has been written about them. They were the brothers Reb Zushya and Reb Elimelech. And according to this particular version of the story, and you have to listen very carefully, it's perhaps one of the most profound things that we've ever said, I think. Reb Zushya said to his brother, who he had very great regard for as being a very holy man, and Reb Zushya himself was something else. Zushya said to his holy brother, Reb Elimelech, he said, I have to ask you a question. I understand about myself, because who am I? But you, how could you have allowed this to happen? He said, when we were together as part of the soul of Adam HaRishon, the first man, how did you allow him to do that? How did you allow him to eat from the tree of knowledge? And Reb Elimelech, without batting an eyelash, instantly responded, I'll tell you why. I remember being there, and I'll tell you why I let it happen. Because I wanted to be able to serve Hashem, to be able to serve God with the evil inclination as part of us. Because I wanted to know what it would be like to have the challenge of the evil inclination and to be able to beat it, to be able to be victorious. That's why I allowed it to happen. I think this is very similar to the concept of King David hearing from this little plug, don't lift me up, because then the Tehom will rise, and I'm here because the world shook when it heard the challenge. Don't forget, I am your God. And King David said, I have to lift that up, because I am Mashiach, and I want the world to come to its perfection. And the way that it's going to come to its perfection is when we all are able to navigate through this narrow bridge of being people, having an evil inclination, and yet to be victorious, because I know that we can do it. And that's what Hashem expects us to do. So King David really foresaw all of this in his role as the forerunner of the power of redemption in the world. You know, there's a very beautiful verse in Kings that tells us that when Bathsheba heard from the lips of King David that her son Shlomo was indeed going to continue the line of King David, she bowed and she said the words, Yichi Adoni HaMelech David Leolam. May my master, King David, live forever. And there's a popular expression, which is part of Jewish tradition, that in fact is part of the liturgy of the special prayers for sanctifying the new moon. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. King David, King of Israel, is alive and well. And the spirit of King David, the collective soul, the great soul of the power of Mashiach, this rendezvous with destiny, that soul is the one that Hashem promises will manifest itself in the world to bring about the final stage of the redemption of all humanity, the time when truly Hashem and His name are one. And that, of course, is the time when the revelation of the divine presence in the Holy Temple will be clear to everyone. There's a very enigmatic midrash that states as follows. This is actually from the Yalkut Shimoni on the book of Samuel. It says, in the future, Israel is destined to show disdain for three things: the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of David, and the building of the temple. Rabbi Simon ben Benassia said, Israel will never see a sign of redemption until they once again desire all three. This is what the verse states. The verse is in Hosea. and afterwards the children of Israel will return and seek out the Lord their God. This is the kingdom of heaven, and David their king. This is the kingdom of David, and they shall come trembling to the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. This is the holy temple. So this is a prophetic fulfillment, I think, that we're beginning to see unfold in our days. We see the nation of Israel indeed seeking out, pining for, yearning for a union with King David, true Jewish leadership. Hadudaim natnu reach, the Davidics give forth their fragrance. So may it be a blessing for us that through our desire to explore the world of King David and draw closer to that great soul, that we should indeed merit to see the unfolding of the redemption of the divine presence in the Holy Temple, the light to Israel and the light to the nations.